description of that meeting. And I don't think there's as much debate as many people thought was emerging. I think that just got quelched by the data we've seen.
And Mike Apen, your thoughts?
So I would agree. I don't think the SEP would have changed all that much. I think the terminal rate projection median would be about the same. I'll just make a point, though, in this regard. You know, you can be hawkish in what you do. You can be hawkish in what you say. After slowing down for the second straight meeting to 25 basis points, it's going to be really hard to change the effect of that, right? So if they really, really wanted to push back against expectations of easing in financial conditions or cuts later, or just if they wanted to kind of, reassert their intent, they could have gone 50 and they didn't. So there's not a lot, I think, that you can talk about at this point without another forecast, to really kind of change what markets think. Markets know you slowed down again.
Mike,
So it's a dovish meeting on net relative to where the committee was just a month or two ago.
If it's a dovish meeting, Michael, and it was nice of you to arrange for CPI Wednesday or whatever it is to be Valentine's Day. Did you know that, John?
I didn't know that.
CPI is Valentine's Day. Michael Gapin, what if we get a disinflationary tinged February 14th CPI day? What does that do to our world?
Well, it reinforces the view that we're past peak inflation. It probably means it's easier for the Fed to accept that inflation's moving lower. And it would reinforce the view of the minds of markets that the Fed could be cutting later this year. So the faster inflation dissipates, then the Fed's at risk of its policy rate getting too tight, right? So there's some probability that you'll get cuts later this year. So I think it would reinforce the narrative.
Dan, you have an understanding of the Midwest of this nation like really no one we speak to. And I want to go to the great Jim Glassman at J.P. Morgan, who is heated in his commercial banking meetings of the optimism of America. I looked at a zip code in Kansas a couple days ago on a Blackstone thing, and the unemployment rate is 2.2% in Kansas. Is the East Coast, are the elites like Lisa Abramowitz overwrought about all this while America booms?
Certainly we are.
Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
I was just going to say on the Midwest, it's really interesting to see the job opening data today in some of the states that are seeing declines in openings like Texas. Related to the tech sector, their job openings actually declined. Florida's still strong, but actually much of the job openings that we saw accelerate were in the Midwest, including Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa. That's important. That's been a shift that we've seen. And talking to the automakers and OEMs, what we're hearing out there is that although they'd like to ramp up, they're worried about affordability on vehicles. And even though they have to ramp up as China reopens and they get more chips, they also just don't have the workers to do it. And they're going into UAW contracts in June, and they aren't wanting third shifts right now. And that's important because labor is a constraint to them. That is something we have to watch very carefully.
Diane, just quickly, we usually give you the opportunity to pose a question for Chairman Powell. Can we wrap things up by doing that? Your thoughts going into this one?
Monzo.com makes Gantz great again. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to say again, because they never were.
Buenas, good afternoon. Estamos aquí revisando the new update on the Federal Reserve. They actually increased the interest rates by 0.25%. That is very exciting. It also means a lot to the economy. There's a lot of things changing. There is a lot of things changing with inflation. So I will be streaming until actually Jerome Powell comes in. He talks to us about the reasons why they thought about increasing interest rates by 0.25. I'm a little bit upset. I honestly thought that they were not going to be doing anything. Yo pensé que no iban a hacer nada, que se iban a quedar sin subir o bajar nada, porque sabemos que la inflación ha sido un gran problema en este último año. Vamos a chequear qué está pasando con los intereses y el mercado en estos momentos. Vemos que de verdad el mercado había hecho un priced in. They actually priced in for the interest rate hike of 0.25. And as you can see, let me actually share it. Vamos a ver, a ver, a ver, a ver. 25. There we are. So as you can see right now today, this is actually Mortgage News Daily. This is how I gather all my information on interest rates on a daily basis, how we change, cómo cambia, qué es lo que está pasando con los intereses el día de hoy. Y como podemos ver, los intereses para un préstamo convencional o un préstamo de 30 años está alrededor del 6.16. Hoy subió un poquito, bajó un poquito, 0.01. Tenemos lo de 15 años a 5.23%. We also have the jumbo loans at 5.70, and we also see the FHA loans at 5.75. Nothing has happened. And if you don't know what's going on, the Feds, they're been getting together. Se están juntando every month now for the past year y han estado subiendo los intereses desde el 2.25 a lo que tenemos ahora, a 2.50, casi ya estamos casi al 6%, 6,5%, inclusive en algunos préstamos de inversionistas estamos viendo ya los 7 o más por cientos de interés. ¿Qué piensa? ¿Qué opiniones tienen por estas cosas que están sucediendo? ¿Tiene alguna usted meta de quizás comprar? ¿Cómo esta noticia cambia quizás su mentalidad con sus propósitos este año? Y algo interesantísimo que quería mostrarles es prácticamente la historia, ¿verdad? La historia de los intereses. Déjame ver si puedo sacar esta gráfica. Y vemos que en los últimos años, ¿verdad? In the last couple years, specifically in 2018, esto es algo que no es nuevo, lo que es un incremento o un desincremento o un cambio de intereses. Vemos que desde el 2017, el 2017, 2016, 2015, vemos que también en Estados Unidos hemos tenido un problema grande, grande, grande con la inflación. Lo único que el COVID, como todos sabemos, el dinero cayó del cielo y muchas cosas sucedieron donde las personas ahora tenían un poquitico más de poder adquisitivo, corporations that were having money, people were just practically getting free money y esto expeditó el problema que teníamos de la inflación. Estaba viendo algunos artículos interesantes del 2018 cuando estaban hablando acerca de los problemas que tenía Estados Unidos con el supply chain, con las cosas para incrementar lo que es el supply, específicamente en dos sectores, lo que es el sector de la agricultura y el sector también del petróleo o la energía. Y una de las razones grandísimas, porque en el 2018, 2019 vimos cómo los intereses subieron de una locura, hasta el punto que vimos casi estábamos viendo en algunas circunstancias intereses ya del 5.25 o el 5% o el 4% en el 2008. Así que esto no es algo nuevo. La verdad que muchas personas estamos comparando intereses altos, lo estamos comparando a lo que sucedió en el 2021, en el 2022. A lot of people they were comparing interest rates hikes today compared to the year 2021 and 2022, where we saw interest rates as low as actually 2.85, 2.50. I even see a client getting a 2.50% interest rate, 2.5%, que en la historia eso había sucedido. Nunca habíamos tenido tan bajos intereses, pero tenemos que entender algo. La economía se paró completamente por esos 2 años. No solamente la economía se paró por esos 2 años, sino que la razón de que el gobierno diera tantos programas, tantas asistencias, PPP loan, EDL loan, we're talking about 30 to 40% of the dollar was actually printed during those years. So, la única manera que vimos, por eso vimos que tantos productos subieron de valor, no solamente en la industria automotriz, como los carros. Yo personalmente quería comprarme un carro en el 2021 y me fue difícil. It was really hard to get a car back in those days. Um, están escribiendo por primera vez. Oh my God. A ver qué está pasando aquí. So, para mí fue súper difícil coger un carro y vemos cómo los carros no solamente empezaron a subir de valor, porque todo el mundo que conocía quería comprarse un carro. Por eso vimos la inflación como subió, porque había más disponibilidad de dinero en el mercado, estaba flooded with money, And at the same time, interest rates were so cheap in order, because no queríamos que la economía se destruyera, ¿verdad? So, una de las maneras que los federales usan para que la economía se mueva es bajando los intereses. Ahora, cuando hay mucho dinero, hay mucha demanda por un producto, lo estamos viendo también en las casas, lo estamos viendo también los mismos huevos, ¿verdad? Chicken eggs, lo estamos viendo en la comida, lo estamos viendo en las bicicletas. Yo me acuerdo que cuando vino el COVID me quería comprar una bicicleta, ¿verdad? Y estaban carísimas. Los vemos también en la ropa. So, por estos 2 años, y lo podemos ver aquí en la gráfica, cuando los intereses de verdad estaban bien bajos para poder impulsar la economía, to make the economy work again. Because honestly, think about it, for 2 years, todo estaba cerrado, negocios se fueron a bancarrota, las personas quizás no estaban consumiendo, las personas no estaban yendo a los restaurantes, las personas no estaban saliendo de vacaciones, así que muchas industrias se vieron paralizadas, los cruceros no se estaban moviendo, y la única manera que tú puedes empujar una economía, push the economy, is by actually giving and providing working capital. Y por eso vimos que los intereses bajaron al 2%, al 2.9%, que en la historia eso había sucedido. Ahora, todas las pastillas, ¿verdad? Cuando nosotros vamos, espérate, déjame ver, porque esta es mi primera vez haciendo esto, ¿verdad? Déjame ver una cosa. A ver si está funcionando, ¿verdad? Vamos a ver si está funcionando, porque esto es algo súper interesante. Sí, 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 sí. Y déjame ver aquí. Y la única manera, lo que está diciendo, la única manera para impulsar la economía en ese sector o en ese sentido es para dar y convertir dinero, pero con la misma manera, de same way, uno se toma una pastilla, ¿verdad? Y la pastilla te puede dar dolor de cabeza, te puede hacer que te dé problemas en el corazón, puede hacer también que te dé problemas, ¿verdad? Las pastillas, todo siempre tiene sus side effects. Cuando llenas una economía de dinero y no se está produciendo de la manera adecuada, ahí es cuando vamos a tener los problemas entonces de inflación, que van a subir los precios porque hay muchos dólares siguiendo un producto específico. Y ahora es lo que vemos para las personas que se estén sintonizando, los federales acaban de subir los intereses al punto 25. Déjeme saber, vamos a estar aquí en directa un tiempito hasta que podamos ver Jerome Powell hablando, o el presidente de la Reserva Federal hablando de las razones del por qué ellos decidieron subir los intereses, punto 25, así que vamos a tener intereses más altos que va a afectar en diferentes ámbitos, tanto para los que estén pensando comprar casa, los que estén pensando también vender su casa, people that are thinking about selling their property also, it will be affecting también esas cosas, los que estén pensando comprarse un carro, los que estén empezando a poner un negocio también y necesitan un préstamo, una línea de crédito para poder emprender, ¿verdad? Vemos que los intereses nos afectan todos, también el gobierno federal, ellos también imprimen, ellos también tienen sus deudas. Ahora estamos viendo que también va a ser más difícil, van a tener que pagar más dinero de intereses, pero el propósito más grande es controlar la inflación. Así que vamos a estar esperando aquí que abre Jerome Powell. ¿Qué preguntas? Si tienen alguna preguntita, algún comentario, les estoy dejando aquí la gráfica de los intereses como están ahora y para que puedan ver, so you guys can see los intereses por los últimos 5 o 10 años. La verdad que intereses altos no es algo que, la verdad que está más alto que lo que ha estado normalmente, pero no es algo que sea nuevo. Lo experimentamos en el 2018, lo experimentamos en el 2017, lo experimentamos también a principios del 2019 y nadie estaba complaining de los intereses en aquel entonces. Las casas se estaban vendiendo, las personas estaban abriendo sus negocios, la economía se estaba moviendo, pero la razón es esta y quiero enseñarles eh, la última data de inflación, ¿verdad? Y también les quiero mostrar otras datas, aparte de la inflación, la data de lo que es las casas aquí en Miami-Dade, las casas en the housing in South Florida, cómo hay diferentes mercados, no solamente estamos viendo Miami-Dade as a whole, pero también hay que ver diferentes mercados como lo que es Coconut Grove, lo que es Hialeah, lo que es Homestead, lo que es Key Biscayne, lo que es Miami Beach, Miami en general. cada mercado es diferente, cada mercado tiene sus propias necesidades y su propio volumen de personas. Cada mercado va a tener diferentes tipos de compradores, donde son las personas que no solamente viven aquí en Miami, pero al mismo tiempo también personas que vienen internacionales de otros países. Estamos viendo personas de Colombia. Ayer tuve una conversación preciosa con unas familias de Nicaragua que están vendiéndolo todo, ¿verdad? Y están pensando venirse para los Estados Unidos a comprar. Así que tenemos todavía, el sur de la Florida sigue siendo un lugar muy atractivo, no solamente internacional, también la generación mía, ¿verdad? La generación de los millennials que ahora están subiendo, están trabajando, tienen sus ahorros, tienen su crédito y están comprando también. Así que les voy a enseñar un poquito de esa data. Voy a recopilar la información para ver cuándo sale Jerome Powell. De nuevo, si no sabe lo que está pasando, acaban de subir los intereses 0.25 y aquí puedes ver en esta gráfica cómo están los intereses hoy en día. Se los voy a dejar acá y regreso con un poquito más de información. Si tiene alguna preguntita, por favor, déjenlo en los comentarios o salúdeme y nos vemos en unos segunditos. Ya sí, sí, empezó a hablar, se empezó a hablar. Vamos a ponerlo, que acaba de empezar a hablar. Y voy a ir traduciendo, ¿verdad? Voy a ir hablando un poquito, traduciendo aquí lo que va diciendo, pero vamos a ver el por qué decidieron subir los intereses.
Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of labor market conditions that benefit all. Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 25 basis points. We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive stance for some time. I will have more to say about today's monetary policy actions after briefly reviewing economic developments. The U.S. economy slowed significantly last year, with real GDP rising at a below-trend pace of 1%. Recent indicators point to modest growth of spending and production this quarter. Consumer spending appears to be expanding at a subdued pace, in part reflecting tighter financial conditions over the past year. Activity in the housing sector continues to weaken, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown in growth, the labor market remains extremely tight, with the unemployment rate at a 50-year low, job vacancies still very high, and wage growth elevated. Job gains have been robust, with employment rising by an average of 247,000 jobs per month over the last 3 months. Although the pace of job gains has slowed over the course of the past year and nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, the labor market continues to be out of balance. Labor demand substantially exceeds the supply of available workers, and the labor force participation rate has changed little from a year ago. Inflation remains well above our longer-run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in December, total PCE prices rose 5.0%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.4%. The inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. But that's not grounds for complacency. Although inflation has moderated recently, it remains too high. The longer the current bout of high inflation continues, the greater the chance that expectations of higher inflation will become entrenched. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal.
Aon helps the people and small businesses working hard.
Vamos, comerciales. Ah, no se pongo el mío. Un poquito. Dice que tomará algún tiempo que las decisiones que están tomando que se vea en la inflación. Van a seguir el curso hasta que el trabajo esté hecho.
Families and businesses across the country, everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chris Rugaber, the Associated Press. Thank you for doing this. As you know, financial conditions have loosened since the fall, with bond yields falling, which has also brought down mortgage rates, and the stock market posted a solid gain in January. Does that make your job of combating inflation harder? And could you see lifting rates higher than you otherwise would to offset the increase in, or to offset the easing of financial conditions?
So it is important that overall financial conditions continue to reflect the policy restraint that we're putting in place in order to bring inflation down to 2%. And of course, financial conditions have tightened very significantly over the past year. I would say that our focus is not on short-term moves, but on sustained changes to broader financial conditions. And it is our judgment that we're not yet in a sufficiently restrictive policy stance, which is why we say that we expect ongoing hikes will be appropriate. Of course, many things affect financial conditions, not just our policy. And we will take into account overall financial conditions along with many other factors as we set policy.
Específicamente lo que es la parte del supply o las cosas que se hacen.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Over the last quarter, we've seen a deceleration in prices, in wages, and a fall in consumer spending, all while the unemployment rate has been able to stay at a historic low. Does this at all change your view of how much the unemployment rate would need to go up, if at all, to see inflation come down to the levels you're looking for?
Está preguntando si ellos quieren ver que el desempleo suba para ellos poder tomar la decisión de que ya la inflación la tenemos controlada.
Has not come at the expense of a weaker labor market. But I would also say that disinflationary process that you now see underway is really at an early stage. What you see is really in the goods sector, you see inflation now coming down because supply chains have been fixed. Demand is shifting back
Dice que el
to
supply chain
services,
o
and
lo que es
shortages
el
have been abated. So
chain
you
de
see that
supply
in
que ya se está arreglando, ¿verdad? Ya tenemos más transportación de productos y servicios.
the housing services sector, we expect inflation to continue moving up.
Dice que lo que es el sector de las casas todavía espera que sigan subiendo de valor o que la inflación en ese aspecto siga subiendo, pero ellos quieren controlar eso.
We have a large sector called non-housing service, core non-housing services, where we don't see disinflation yet. But I would say that so far what we see is progress, but without any weakening in labor market conditions.
Has your
Go ahead.
Has your expectation for where the unemployment rate might go changed since December?
You know, we're going to write down new forecasts at the March meeting, and we'll see at that time. I will say that it is gratifying to see the disinflationary process now getting underway, and we continue to get strong labor market data. But you know, we'll update those forecasts in March.
Están esperando para hacer una predicción del futuro, están esperando el reporte de trabajo, a ver si tenemos más desempleo. Que por cierto, los desempleos no, contrario, más trabajo.
Out of the labor market without major job losses. We saw the opposite in the December JOLTS this morning. Job openings actually rising. That also has coincided with slowdown in wage inflation. Do you believe that openings are an important indicator to be studying to understand where the labor market is and where wage inflation might be heading?
So you're right about the data, of course. What we've seen average hourly earnings and now the employment cost index abating a little bit, still off of their highs of 6 months ago and more, but still at levels that are fairly elevated. The job openings number in JOLTS has been quite volatile recently. And I did see that it moved back up this morning. I do think that it's probably an important indicator. The ratio, I guess, is back up.
Por cierto, el mercado de bonds que controla los intereses todavía no se ha reflejado porque ya están preparando para esta subida, pero vemos cómo los intereses todavía están bajo 0.01 desde que empezó el día. Dice que el mercado de trabajo todavía sigue siendo fuerte y es verdad, hemos visto un incremento en aperturas de trabajo.
Given the economic data since the December meeting, is the trajectory for the Fed funds rate in the most recent SEP still the best guidepost for the policy path forward, or does ongoing now mean more than 2 rate rises now?
Okay, está preguntando si esperan dos subidas más. We all wrote down our best estimates of what we thought
el mercado está
would be, and that's obviously back in December, and the median.
Está encantando la noticia. Están viendo que la inflación estaba bajando, pero eso es bueno.
At the March meeting, we're going to update those assessments. We did not update them today. We did, however, continue to say that we believe ongoing rate hikes will be appropriate to attain a sufficiently restricted stance of policy to bring inflation back down to 2%.
Que no tienen una predicción del futuro en estos momentos, que lo van a esperar para marzo. Pero que esperan dos subidas más de interés. Así que está cogiendo un préstamo, el mejor momento para aprovechar, ¿verdad? Antes que suban más los intereses.
I don't feel a lot of certainty about where that will be. It could certainly be higher than we're writing down right now. If we come to the view that we need to write down to move rates up beyond what we said in December, we would certainly do that.
Bueno, at the same time, que no quería que yo esperaba que lo dejaran.
In the other direction, then we'll make data-dependent decisions at coming meetings, of course.
Just as a quick follow-up, how are you
en el siguiente marzo es donde tendrán mejor información.
You know, the likelihood of maybe falling short of that or going beyond that level?
I guess I would say it this way. I continue to think that it's very difficult to manage the risk of doing too little and finding out in 6 or 12 months that we actually were close but didn't get the job
Dice
done.
que
Inflation
el
springs back and you have to
riesgo
go
de no
back in.
hacer, de
And
hacer
now
muy
you
poquito
really do worry
es
about
muy grande
expectations
por la
getting
inflación.
unanchored.
Así que
and
por
that
eso
kind of thing.
prefieren
This is a very
subir aunque sea
difficult
25,
risk to manage.
punto 25 para manejar el
You know,
riesgo
of course, we have no
y
incentive
no
and
hacer
no
muy
desire
poquito.
to over tighten, but you know, if we feel like we've gone too far, we can certainly and inflation is coming down faster than we expect, then we have tools that would work on that. So I do think that in this situation where we have still the highest inflation in 40 years, you know, the job is not fully done. As I started to mention earlier, we have a sector that represents 56% of the core inflation index where we don't see disinflation yet. So we don't see it. It's not happening yet.
Dice que no ve desinflation todavía, o la inflación en algunos tipos de servicios que para ellos son importantes, especialmente housing, las casas. Sabemos que las rentas, todavía las casas siguen subiendo de valor en algunos sectores, no todos, especialmente aquí en Miami.
Although you don't actually see disinflation yet in housing services, but it's in the pipeline, right? So for the third sector, we don't see anything here. So I think it would be premature. It would be very premature to declare victory or to think that we've really got this. We need to see. Our goal, of course, is to bring inflation down. And how do we get that done? There are many factors driving inflation in that sector, and they should be coming into play to have inflation, the disinflationary process, begin in that sector. But so far, we don't see that. And I think until we do, we see ourselves as having a lot of work left to do.
Howard Schneider with Reuters, and thanks as usual. So I just wanted to connect a couple dots here. The statement's made a number of changes. The CB saying things are getting better. You're saying inflation has eased. That's new. You've taken out references to the war in Ukraine as causing price increases. You've taken out references to the pandemic. You've eliminated all the reasons that you said prices were being driven higher. Yet that's not mapping to any change in how you describe policy. We still have ongoing increases to come. So I'm wondering, why is that the case? And does it have more to do with uncertainty around the outlook, or more to do with you not wanting to give a very overeager market a reason to get ahead of itself and overreact?
So I guess I would say it this way. We can now say, I think, for the first time, that the disinflationary process has started.
Okay, estos son buenas noticias. Dice que por primera vez están diciendo que la desinflación, el proceso de desinflación ya ha empezado. Así que eso es muy bueno. Muy bueno.
And it's demand revolving back towards services. So this is a good thing. But that's, you know, around a quarter of the PCE price index, core PCE price index. Okay. So the second sector is housing services.
El segundo sector que está enfocado en las casas.
Things. And
es algo diferente.
As I mentioned, with housing services, we expect, and other forecasters expect, that measured inflation will continue moving up for several months.
Se esperan que la inflación en las casas siga subiendo.
That new leases continue to be soft.
Asumiendo que las nuevas rentas sean más suaves.
We actually see disinflation in the goods sector, and we see it in the pipeline for two sectors that amount to a little less than half. So this is good.
Está subiendo, una locura.
We say inflation is coming down. This is good. We expect to see that disinflation process will be seen, we hope soon, in the core goods ex-housing, the core services ex-housing sector that I talked about. We don't see it yet. It's 7 or 8 different kinds of services. Not all of them are the same, and we have a sense of what's going on in each of those different subsections. Probably the biggest part of it, probably 60% of that is. Research would show incentive to slacken the economy, and so the labor market will probably be important. Some of the other ones, the labor market's not going to be important. Many other factors will drive it. In any case, we don't see disinflation in that sector yet, and I think we need to see that. It's the majority of the core PCE index, which is the thing that we think is the best predictor of headline PCE, which is our mandate. So it's not that we're neither optimistic nor pessimistic. We're just telling you that we don't see inflation moving down yet in that large sector. I think we will fairly soon, but we don't see it yet. Until we do, I think we see ourselves, we got to be honest with ourselves, we see ourselves as having perhaps more persistent inflation in that sector, which will take longer to get down. And we're just going to have to we have to complete the job. I mean, that's
Dice que tienen que completar el trabajo. Algunos sectores están viendo ya que por primera vez dicen que ya tenemos un proceso de desinflación, pero lo que es el mercado de housing, el mercado de las casas, todavía esperan que siga un poquito la inflación, específicamente con las rentas, hasta que ellos puedan ya controlar esa parte y que podamos ver una desinflación. En algunos sectores, ¿verdad? Después tenemos que hablar de Miami, porque Miami es diferente. Algunas partes de Miami.
So we've raised rates 4.5 percentage points, and we're talking about a
Han
couple
subido ya
more
4,5
rate
y están
hikes
hablando de
to get to
subirlo
that level we
un
think
poquito
is
más,
appropriately
2 veces
restrictive.
más.
And why do we think that's probably necessary? We think because inflation is still running.
Comerciales.
Hey, my name is Mike Johnson. I'm with Century 21 Blue Marlin
Tengo que
Pelican.
pagar
The story we're telling about inflation is, to ourselves, and the way we understand it, is basically the three things that I've just gone through a couple times. And again, we don't see it affecting the services sector ex housing yet. But I mean, I think our assessment is that we're not very far from that level. We don't know that, though. We don't know that. So I think we're living in a world of significant uncertainty. I would look across
El mercado le encantó la noticia.
the spectrum
Tienen
of
eso.
rates and see that real rates are now positive.
El que
We're in a
compró hoy,
set of measures are positive across the yield curve. I think policy is restrictive. We're trying to make a fine judgment
en sí son
about
buenas
how
noticias
much
lo que
is
estamos
restrictive
viendo.
enough, that's all. And we're going to, that's why we're slowing down to
Yo digo que
25
va a ser
basis points.
un dolor
We're going to be careful
temporal
watching the
para aquellas
economy
personas que estén
and watching
comprando o
inflation
adquiriendo
and
algún
watching the
tipo de
progress of the
propiedad o
disinflationary
servicios con
process.
préstamos. Las tarjetas de crédito también van a subir. Los intereses, por cierto.
At this meeting this week?
You'll see the minutes will come out in 3 weeks, and we'll give you a lot of detail. We spent a lot of time talking about the path ahead, and the state of the economy, and I wouldn't want to start to describe all the details there, but that was the sense of the discussion, was really talking quite a bit about the path forward.
Victoria. Hi, Chair Powell. I wanted to ask about the debt ceiling. Given that we've now hit up against it, I was wondering if the U.S. goes past the X date, will the Fed do whatever the Treasury directs as it relates to
Vamos a ver qué es lo que dicen en subir la deuda de Estados Unidos. Yo digo que no se puede hacer. No se puede hacer.
So your question is, say your question again?
Will the Fed do what Treasury directs as it relates to making payments, or will it do its own analysis of any legal constraints?
So you're really asking about, you're asking about prioritization in effect, is what
Yes,
you're, okay.
yes.
So I feel like I have to say this. There's only one way forward here, and that is for Congress to raise the debt ceiling so that the United States government can pay all of its obligations when due. And any deviations from that path would be highly risky, and that no one should assume that the Fed can protect the economy from the consequences of failing to act in a
Ahí estoy
timely manner.
completamente de
In
desacuerdo.
terms of our
Sí se
relationship
puede
with the
hacer
Treasury, we
un
are the fiscal
balance
agent,
del
and I'm just
budget.
going to leave it at that.
No hay que subir, no hay que prestar más dinero. Es como un negocio. O sea, lo que está diciendo es que es lo que piensa que deberían hacer.
This is a matter
Congreso
that's to
dice
be
que el Congreso
resolved
debería
between,
subir la deuda.
really, it's really Congress's job to raise the debt ceiling.
Eso es lo que quieren,
And
que suban,
I
que
gather there are
suban
discussions
la
happening,
deuda.
but they don't involve us. We're not involved
Siempre
in those
recuérdese,
discussions.
la
So
Reserva Federal no tiene nada que
we're
ver
the
con el
fiscal
gobierno, es una institución privada. Una institución privada donde le da el dinero a los gobiernos en todo el mundo. Cada
Gina
país
Smiley
tiene
from the New York
su
Times.
reserva
Thanks for
federal.
taking our questions.
Y en este caso Estados
I
Unidos
wonder,
tiene su
was
reserva
there any
federal, la que
discussion
controla y
today of the
ayuda con la
possibility
inflación.
of pausing
Y
rate
todo el
increases
dinero que le
and
hace
then
falta a los
restarting them?
gobiernos para
Lori
poder
Logan from the
continuar
Federal Reserve Bank of
funcionando.
Dallas seemed to suggest that that would be a
Carreteras,
possibility in a recent
los
speech.
diferentes
And I
programas
wonder if that
sociales,
view is broadly shared on the
etcétera.
committee.
Pero ahora estamos ya casi 32 trillones.
So,
¿Qué opina usted? Déjeme saber, ¿qué opina? ¿Qué opina?
did
¿Deberían
not see
subir
this as a
el
time to
debt
pause.
ceiling? ¿Deberían subir la
We
deuda?
judged that the appropriate
¿O de verdad el gobierno
thing to
podría
do at
hacer un
this meeting was
balance
to
de
raise
esta
the federal
deuda
funds rate by
o un
25
balance
basis
de los
points,
fondos,
and we said that we
quizás
continue
dar
to
dinero en un
anticipate
lugar
that
como un
ongoing
negocio?
increases in the target range will
Tenemos
be
un negocio y
appropriate in
estamos
order to
cogiendo
attain that
intereses y no estamos
stance of
produciendo. ¿Qué es lo que va a pasar
sufficient
con
restrictive
ese
monetary policy that will
negocio,
bring
verdad? ¿Es
inflation down to
sostenible por
2%.
el
So
largo tiempo?
that's the
No lo creo.
judgment that we made.
¿Qué piensa usted? No
We're
sé.
going to write down new forecasts in
What do you
March.
think? What do you guys
and,
think about this debt
and
ceiling
we'll
situation?
certainly be looking at the incoming data as everyone else will.
Sorry, I should have been clear. I mean, would it be possible to take a meeting off, for example, and then resume? You know, could you, rather than just doing at every meeting a move, go a little bit more slowly, take some gaps in between moves?
I mean, I think this is not something that the committee is thinking about or exploring in any kind of detail. In principle, though, you know, we used to do was go every other meeting, if you remember, 25 basis points, and that was considered a fast pace. So I think a lot of options are available, and I mean, you saw what the Bank of Canada did, and you know, they left it that they're willing to raise rates after pausing. But this is not something that the Federal Open Market Committee is on the point of deciding right now.
Steve.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, the SEP has the PCE inflation rate in 2023 at 3.1%. Meanwhile, the 3-month annualized PCE is 2.1%, and you've achieved this without going to your 5.1% funds rate, which is what you have penciled in for this year. And you've also achieved it without the 1 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, which you have penciled in for this year. I'm wondering if you've considered the idea of whether or not your understanding of the inflation dynamic may be wrong, and it's possible to achieve these things without raising rates that high, and also without the surge in unemployment. And specifically, I wonder if you might comment on the speech given by Vice Chair Lael Brainerd, who said, to the extent that inputs other than wages may be responsible in part for important price increases for some non-housing services, an unwinding of these factors. In other words, it may not be wages, the idea that it may not require unemployment rising to get this sector of inflation under control. Thanks.
Okay. Están preguntando acerca de lo que es unemployment o el desempleo. Unemployment, just to see if they want to see a certain point of level of unemployment in order
measures of
to affect inflation.
PCE, core PCE inflation, they're quite low right now, but that's because that's driven by significantly negative readings from goods inflation. Most forecasters would think that the significantly negative readings will be transitory, and that goods inflation will move up fairly soon back up to its longer run trend of something around 0, something like that.
Voy a mejorar.
A lot of forecasts would call for core PCE to go back up to 4% by the middle of the year, for example. So that's really where the sustainable level is more like at 4%. So that would suggest there's work left to do. You know, let's say inflation does come down much faster than we expect, which is possible. As I mentioned, you know, obviously our policies data dependent, we take that into account. In terms of the core non-housing services, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very diverse sector, 6 or 7 sectors, and so sectors that represent 55 or 60% of that subsectors of that sector. We think are sensitive to slack in the economy, sensitive to the labor market in a way. But some of the other sectors are not. And for example, you know, financial services is a big sector. That's really not driven by labor markets, wages. So that's why I said there are a number of things that will affect. Take restaurants, right? So clearly labor is important for restaurants, but so are food prices. And, you know, transportation services is going to be driven by fuel prices, for example. So there are lots of things in that mix that will drive inflation. I would say overall, though, my own view would be that you're not going to have a sustainable return to 2% inflation in that sector without a better balance in the labor market. And I don't know what that will require in terms of increased unemployment, your question. I do think there are a number of dimensions through which the labor market can soften. And so far, we've got, as I mentioned, in goods, we have inflation moving down without the softening in the labor market. I think most forecasters would say that unemployment will probably rise a bit from here, but I continue to think that there's a path to getting inflation back down to 2% without a really significant economic decline or a significant increase in unemployment. And that's because the setting we're in is quite different. The inflation that we originally got was very much a collision between very strong demand and hard supply constraints, not something that you really have seen in prior in prior business cycles. And so now we see goods inflation coming down for the reasons we thought. And we
todo
understand
se
why housing
paró.
inflation will
Entonces,
come down.
a la
I
hora de
think a
pararse
story
todo,
will emerge on
pues ya
the
ver y el
non-housing
spending o la
services
gente
sector
siguiendo
soon
gastando dinero
enough.
que
But I think
tenían o
there's
quizás
ongoing disinflation
muchos
that we don't
sectores
yet see.
subieron de precio, por eso vemos la
We don't
inflación
yet
que la
see
tenemos
weakening
hoy.
in the labor market.
Es algo
So
que no es
we'll have to
normal.
see.
Ahora se está arreglando esa parte de lo que es el supply
Certainly
chain
possible.
o
Yeah, absolutely it's
la
possible.
cadena
It's a question
de
no
supply,
one
no sé
really
cómo decirlo en
knows. I think
español,
it's because
la cadena de lo que
this is
entregan
not
los
like the other
productos,
business
lo que
cycles
hacen los
in so many
productos,
ways.
etcétera.
It
Y
may
poquito a
well
poquito
be
vemos que ya lo que es el
that
gasto de
as
dinero se está acercando, pero también el
that it will
supply
take
chain se está
more
acomodando a los
slowing
niveles
than we
que
expect,
tenemos
and I
antiguos.
expect to
Que
get
ojo,
inflation down to 2%.
el
But
supply chain, ese problema
that's not
viene
my
desde
base
el
case. My base case
2017,
is
2016, o sea, no es
that,
algo nuevo, sino que el
the
COVID
economy can
lo puso peor.
return to 2% inflation without a really significant downturn or a really big
Así que
increase in
quieren,
unemployment.
dice que
I think
podemos llegar al
that's a
2% de
possible
inflación,
outcome.
que es posible, lo
I
llevan
think
diciendo hace un
many,
año,
many forecasters would
pero
say
que sí, que
it's
es
not the most
posible.
likely outcome, but I would say there's a chance of it.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'd like to pick up on what you were just saying about a substantial downturn and ask, with the full weight of your tightening not in place yet, and with the progress against inflation, there's still a lot of talk about very, very slow growth going forward in 2023. And the recession indicators are all suggesting that we are going to see recession this year. So I'm wondering if you've changed your view, or you have a more nuanced view of what you think the danger to economic growth is going forward, and whether you're very close to
Está preguntando
perhaps
cuál es
tipping it
el
into
peligro
the wrong
de si
place, which
seguimos
calls for
haciendo
more
esto, que
restraint on your
podamos
part.
entrar en una recesión
So
o
I
un
do
problema
think
grande de la economía.
most forecasts and my own assessment would be that growth will continue. Positive growth will continue, but at a subdued pace, as it did last year. We had growth of GDP growth of 1% last year, and also
Dice que esperan que la
final
economía
sales
siga
growth, which we think is-
creciendo,
which
pero
we think is a
quizás
better indicator
a
of
un
about
tono
1%.
más
I
despacio.
think, most forecasts, and certainly my assessment would be that growth will continue at a fairly subdued level this year. There are other factors, though, that need to be considered. You will have seen that the global picture is improving a bit, and that will matter for us potentially. The labor market remains very, very strong, and that's job creation, that's wages. As inflation does come down, sentiment will improve. You also, state and local governments are really flush these days with money, and many of them are considering tax cuts or even sending checks. So I think that's going to support. They're also spending a lot. There's a lot of spending coming in the construction pipeline, both private and public, and so that's going to support economic activity. So I think there's a good chance that those factors will help support positive growth this year, and that's my base case is that there will be positive growth this year.
Thank you. Rich Miller from Bloomberg. First of all, how are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Fine.
Good. Second off, I think earlier on in the press conference, you said you need to see substantially more evidence of inflation coming down. Can you give us some idea of what you're thinking of? You mentioned
Okay,
3
¿qué
months,
evidencia
we've seen 3
necesitan
months in a
ellos
row.
para
Governor
ver
Wallace
que la
suggested
inflación
we
está
might wanna
bajando?
see 6 months.
Porque hemos visto
Is it
en
just
algunos
the
reportes que la
inflation
inflación
matter, or do
sí
you have
está
to see
bajando, así que está preguntando qué
the
evidencia
labor
necesitan
market
ver.
coming back into better balance to have that substantially
Vamos
more
a ver
evidence,
lo que dice.
So I don't think there's going to be a light switch flipped or anything like that. I think it's just an accumulation of evidence. So of course we'll be looking, by the time of the March meeting, we'll have 2 more employment reports, 2 more CPI reports.
Marzo vamos a tener
and
2
we'll be
reportes
looking at
más
those
de
carefully, as
inflación,
all of us will.
y en marzo vamos a tener
And
2
we'll be
reportes
asking
más de
ourselves, what are they telling us?
desempleo. Vamos a ver.
Soon
Y
after
ahí
that,
dicen
we'll
que
have
van a
another
tomar más
ECI
decisiones.
wage report, which, as you know, is a report that we like because it adjusts for composition.
Dice que el reporte que van a estar viendo es el reporte de pago, wage, dinerito que se va a las personas a la casa.
Was constructive. It shows wages coming down, but still at a high level. They're still at a level that's well above where they were before the pandemic. So I don't want to put a number on it in terms of months, but as the accumulated evidence comes in, it's going to be reflected in our assessment of the outlook, and that will be reflected in our policy over time. But I will say, though, it is our job to restore price stability and achieve 2% inflation for the benefit of the American public. Market participants have a very different job, and it's a fine job. It's a great job. In fact, I did that job for years, but in one form or another. But we have to deliver that, and so we are strongly resolved that we will, complete this task because we think it has benefits that will, support economic activity and benefit the public for many, many years.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Fed Chairman, for taking the questions. So you've talked about we had solid job growth. I'm Edward Lawrence from Fox Business, by the way. We had solid job growth, a slight falling in the increase in consumer spending. It seems so far it's been relatively mild from the economy to go from a 9.1% CPI inflation to 6.5% CPI inflation. Is the hard part yet to come to go from 6.5 to 2?
I don't think we know.
Así que la parte difícil está para llegar a las 6.5 que tenemos en inflación ahora, 6.5 inflation, to make it to 2. Si esa es la parte, lo peor está por venir.
Of 2021. And it didn't come down all through 22, and now it's coming down, and it's coming down pretty fast. So I would say this is not a standard business cycle where you can look at the last 10 times there was a global pandemic and we shut the economy down.
Un cycle
Congress did what it did, and we
normal.
did. It's
Vemos que ya el 2021 la inflación seguía subiendo, estaba difícil, pero ahora estamos viendo que está bajando. Así que esto no es algo normal, pero lo que lo vamos a estar tomando poco a poco. Que puede ser rápido, puede tomarse más tiempo.
Inflation back to target, and we will do that. But I think we're going to be cautious about declaring victory and sending signals that we think that the game is won, because we've got a long way to go. It's the early stages of disinflation, and it's most welcome to be able to say that we are now in disinflation. But that's great, but we just see that it has to spread through the economy and that it's going to take some time. That's all.
How long do you see then the federal funds rate remaining at this elevated level?
So my forecast and that of my colleagues, as you will see from the S&P, and I mean there are many different forecasts, but generally it's a forecast of slower growth, some softening in labor market conditions, and inflation moving down steadily, but not quickly. And in that case, if the economy performs broadly in line with those expectations, it will not be appropriate to cut rates this year, to loosen policy this year. Of course, other people have forecasts with inflation coming down much faster. That's a different thing. If that happens, if inflation comes down much faster, then we'll be seeing that, and it will be incorporated into our thinking about policy.
Simon.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rinovich with The Economist. May I ask a further question about the language around ongoing increases? That, of course, implies at least 2 further rate rises. If you look at Fed Fund futures pricing, the implication is that you'll raise rates one more time and then pause. Are you concerned about that divergence, or do you think if everything breaks right, is that a plausible outcome?
I'm not particularly concerned about the divergence, no, because it is largely due to the market's expectation that inflation will move down more quickly. I think that's the bigger part of that. So again, as I just mentioned, our forecasts, different participants have different forecasts, but generally those forecasts are for continued subdued growth, some softening in the labor market, but not a recession. A recession.
Dice que estamos viendo
inflation moving down.
Inflation que está bajando.
El
mercado de trabajo
sigue
subiendo, pero
se está poniendo más lento. Markets are past that.
El mercado está ya, vemos que el mercado ha subido porque creen que ya la inflación se venció, pero ellos no están mirando el mercado del stock market o el mercado de Nueva York para tomar sus decisiones.
Given our outlook, I don't see us cutting rates this year if our outlook turns true.
Este año no ven cómo van a cortar los intereses. Tienen que ver a los dos más reportes y a ver que si se mantienen, a ver qué es lo que pasa. Pero que no ven cómo van a bajar los intereses este año.
Hi, Chair Powell. Scott Horsley from NPR. One of the changes in the statement this month is that the committee is no longer listing public health as among the data points you'll consider in assessing conditions. What should we make of that? Does the Federal Reserve no longer see the pandemic as weighing on the economy?
That's the general sense of it. Look, we understand, I personally understand well that COVID is still out there. But
preguntando si el
that it's
COVID
no
todavía
longer
les
playing an
hace
important role in
tomar
our
la decisión,
economy.
piensa que el
And
COVID
we
todavía
kept
está
that
afuera.
statement in there for quite a while, and I think we knew we would take it out at some point. There's never a perfect time. But we thought that, people are handling it better, and the economy and the society are handling it better now. It doesn't really need to be in the Fed's monthly or post-meeting statement as an ongoing economic risk, as opposed to, a health issue.
Nancy. Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. I wanted to go back to another thing that Fed Vice Chair
Dice que el COVID todavía sigue estando ahí,
she
pero
said
que
she
ellos están
doesn't
mirando
see
ya
signs of a wage
más
price
ya la economía
spiral.
funcionando, ¿verdad? Past COVID ya no estamos pensando en eso.
People are talking about inflation all day long, every day. The more risk of something like that. But no, there's not much. It's more of a risk. It always has been more of a risk than anything else. By the way, I think it's becoming less salient, and people are. We pick that up in conversations, and I've seen some data too that show people are, gradually they're glad that inflation's coming down. People really don't like inflation, and as we see it coming down, that could also add a boost to economic activity. You look at the sentiment
Dice que
now,
el sentimiento de la inflación a la gente no le gusta, pero que al ver la inflación ya el sentimiento de las personas es diferente, entonces hace que el mercado se mueva más y la economía se mueva más en ese sentido.
I think once inflation is seen to be coming down in
Una vez que
coming
la
months,
inflación ya esté en los siguientes
a
meses,
boost to sentiment, I hope.
van a haber un incremento en actividad económica en diferentes sectores.
That's at the very heart. It's consumers and businesses that essentially.
Es verdad, muchas personas por las noticias vemos que se han pensado en gastar menos, ¿verdad? Quizás vacaciones que no han hecho, cosas que no han comprado, ahorros. La verdad las cosas se han puesto caras, ¿verdad?
It has to be. We think it's important. And in this case, I would say the risk 8 months ago or so, longer-term inflation expectations had moved up. We moved quite vigorously last year. Expectations seem to be well anchored, including at the shorter end now, not just the longer end. So it's, and I think that's very reassuring. I think, the markets have decided and the public has decided that inflation is going to come back down to 2%, and it's just a matter of us following through. That's measurably helpful to the process of getting inflation down. The fact that people now do generally believe that it will come down, that will be part of the process of getting it down, and it's a very positive thing.
Que es algo muy positivo para la economía.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from Market Watch. In the minutes of the December meeting, there was a couple sentences that struck people as important. When the committee said participants talked about this unwarranted easing of financial conditions was a risk, and it would make your life harder to bring inflation down. I haven't heard you talk much about that today or in the statement, so I was wondering, has that concern eased among members, or is that still something you're concerned about? Thank you.
I would put it this way. It's something that we monitor carefully. Financial conditions didn't really change much from the December meeting to now.
Sé que las condiciones financieras no han cambiado mucho desde diciembre ahora.
It's important that the markets do reflect the tightening that we're putting in place.
Pero dice que es importante que el mercado
there's a different perspective by some market measures on how fast inflation will come down. We're just going to have to see. I'm not going to try to persuade people to have a different forecast. But our forecast is that it will take some time and some patience, and that we'll need to keep rates higher for longer. But we'll see.
Let's go to Brendan for the last question.
Hi, Chair Powell. Brendan Peterson with Punchbowl News. I wanted to ask if the Fed takes into account at all the debt ceiling when it comes to quantitative tightening, given the fact that rapid or
I don't think there's likely to be any important interaction between the two because I believe Congress will wind up acting, and as it will and must in the end, to raise the debt ceiling in a way that doesn't risk
Sigue
the progress we're
hablando,
making against
sigue
inflation
hablando de
and the
subir
economy and the financial sector. I believe that will happen. I believe it will happen.
y seguir
We
el
of course
límite
will
de
monitor
deuda de
money
Estados
market
Unidos.
conditions carefully.
Completamente en desacuerdo. Yo creo que se puede balancear
As
el
the
budget
process
como
moves
cualquier
on.
otro
For
negocio
example,
y no hay
the
necesidad de
Treasury
adquirir
General
más
account
deuda,
will shrink down and then it will grow back
al
up.
menos
And we understand there'll be
temporalmente.
lots of flows between there and the overnight repo facility and reserves. We understand all that. We're watching it carefully. We'll just be monitoring it. Thank you very much.
That wraps up the
Ahí
news
se le
conference with
cajó.
Chairman Powell, a balanced Fed.
Increíble, increíble. Así que esa es la noticia, ¿verdad? Vemos cómo los intereses subieron, 0.25. La razón principal, basada en lo que ellos acaban de decir, es eso, que quieren seguir controlando la inflación. Y tres cosas estoy viendo de esto. Una, Jerome Powell sigue pensando que todavía el mercado inmobiliario en diferentes sectores, ¿verdad? Vemos que las noticias tiran: "Oye, el mercado se está acabando, menos ventas", pero siempre hace esta pregunta: ¿contra qué lo están comparando? ¿Verdad? Si lo estamos comparando al mercado desde el año 21 al 22, eso fue un mercado que espero que nunca vuelva a suceder, ¿verdad? Vimos que ese mercado no solamente había más dinero con el COVID, todo el mundo tenía dinero, los intereses fueron los más, y lo podemos ver acá de nuevo, ¿verdad? Como se los puse ahorita. No solamente los intereses fueron los intereses más bajos históricamente que hemos experimentado, haciendo que hubiese más dinero en el mercado, pero al mismo tiempo vemos cómo la economía se paralizó. Personas también, los ahorros mejoraron, los pagos de las tarjetas de crédito mejoraron, las personas estaban más en casa, las personas entonces tuvieron la oportunidad, ¿verdad? No teníamos esa vida por los últimos 2 años, la vida esa ajetreada que teníamos siempre de tomar decisiones a lo loco, y entonces por eso las personas tomaron decisiones de comprar cosas, ¿verdad? De comprar carros, comprar casa, sentarse con la familia y conversar y ver y mudarse, ¿verdad? Muchos vimos y específicamente estaba leyendo una noticia el otro día que mencionaba cómo, ¿verdad? Cuando vino el Internet a las grandes ciudades, las personas siguieron con sus vidas porque el Internet sí les dio la oportunidad de trabajar de donde quieran, pero nunca han tenido la oportunidad de parar y tomar la decisión de mudarse, ¿verdad? Esa es la parte más difícil a veces cuando nosotros llegamos a un lugar y el mudarnos es muy difícil porque significa que tienes que hacer muchos cambios en tu vida. Pero el COVID dio la oportunidad de las personas pararse y reflexionar y decir: ok, tenemos los intereses al 2.5, ya no estamos gastando dinero en vacaciones porque no podemos, tenemos los intereses bajitos, hemos ahorrado, no estamos gastando dinero, ahora puedo trabajar desde la casa, ahora puedo cambiar de trabajo. El mundo entero se paralizó, ahora tenemos millones y millones de personas tomando decisiones en sus vidas porque la verdad que no teníamos algo más en la mente, ¿verdad? Estábamos preocupados, y también algunos estados tomaron decisiones, ¿verdad? Decisiones que usted puede estar de acuerdo, usted puede estar en desacuerdo, pero cada decisión que tomó cada estado en cómo controló el COVID hizo que las personas se mudaran por sus propios intereses. Y vemos cómo Miami fue uno de esos lugares donde las personas también, Miami, el sur de la Florida, Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando, mercados que explotaron. No solamente personas de todos los estados en Estados Unidos, pero también personas internacionales. Vemos también como el dinero, ¿verdad? Como el dólar no solamente se puso súper, súper fuerte contra lo de los otros países, donde la moneda de esas personas también perdió valor. Entonces esas personas decidieron también traer la mayoría de su dinero, vender sus propiedades, la mudanza que hemos visto, un incremento grandísimo en la población y muchas personas ustedes lo pueden ver no solamente en el tráfico, la cantidad de apartamentos y viviendas que se han creado. Vamos a tener el primer edificio de 100 pisos aquí en Brickell, aquí en Miami. La actividad económica, estamos teniendo también más eventos, Fórmula 1, el tráfico, y nosotros lo podemos ver las personas que hemos estado viviendo aquí por mucho tiempo, ¿verdad? Y eso hizo que muchos de los precios subieran por el simple hecho de que las personas podían ahora gastar un poquito más de dinero. Ahora, ellos, tercera cosa que estaba mencionando también que ellos piensan es, están viendo cómo se espera también que la inflación en lo que es housing o lo que es vivienda suba un poco más hasta que ellos puedan controlar eso, quizás subiendo en dos ocasiones más. En marzo vamos a ver cómo ellos actúan. Pero es súper, súper interesante la noticia de hoy, ¿verdad? Que el mercado ha reaccionado positivamente, específicamente por la noticia número uno, que la inflación está empezando a coger un curso en abajo, ¿verdad? La inflación empieza a bajar, se empieza a controlar y entonces los federales están tomando la decisión. No es la primera vez que lo vemos, no es la primera vez que vemos cómo ellos lo intentan arreglar, pero sí es la primera vez que vemos que la inflación se ha ido en nuestro, yo creo que en mi vida, ¿verdad? Y en muchas vidas de ustedes, que hemos visto que la inflación ha subido tanto. ¿Cómo está el mercado acerca de los intereses? Vemos cómo el mercado ha reaccionado positivo. No vemos ningún movimiento en respecto con los intereses todavía. Así que vamos a seguir analizando el mercado en los siguientes días. Vemos que el SPY, la bolsa, de verdad que está reaccionando bien, bien positivo a la, wow, 1% que compró hoy. Ahora tengo que hablar aquí con algunos familiares que nos encanta eso de la bolsa. A ver si compró, a ver si compramos esta mañana. Pero excelentes, excelentes noticias. Simplemente quería compartir con ustedes esta noticia. En los siguientes días estoy preparando un show, ¿verdad? Para poder hablar un poquito de todo. Estoy tratando de figure it out en inglés o en español. De verdad que cuando hablamos de dos idiomas se nos hace muy difícil, ¿verdad? Porque en tanto que tenemos personas que hablamos inglés, personas en español, pero vamos a hacer un show un poquito interesante, vamos a hacer entrevistas en las calles, vamos a estar trayendo eh, personas, invitados a tener conversaciones de sus experiencias, vamos a hacer cosas motivadoras. Aquí no va a ser solamente hablando de bienes y raíces, como todos saben, yo soy realtor, me encanta lo que es bienes y raíces, me encanta hablar del mercado, pero vamos a hablar de todo un poco y lo vamos a hacer un poco, vamos a hacerlo lo que pienso y vamos a tratar de hacerlo interesante y ustedes me dejan saber. Déjenme saber qué es lo que opinan de esta noticia. La verdad que es súper interesante. Si tienen cualquier pregunta, sugerencias o cómo le afecta esta noticia del incremento de 0.25, lo vamos a estar viendo en los siguientes días de verdad cómo se afecta el mercado. De verdad que ahora se acaba de anunciar, todavía no ha surgido efecto realmente, pero bueno, quería agradecerles por todas las personas que entraron aquí. Veo que hubo algunas me mandaron mensajes, me dieron manitos arriba. Y como siempre, gracias por el apoyo. Mi nombre es Jesús Casares, un agente de bienes y raíces aquí con la Kais Company en Miami. Cualquier pregunta, si está pensando vender, si está pensando comprar, si está pensando invertir, siempre es bueno tener una conversación, escuchar diferentes opiniones, como cuando uno va al doctor, que uno habla para ver diferentes opiniones y tomar la mejor decisión que pueda. La verdad que nunca, nunca está mal, tomar una decisión de comprar o vender, pero siempre el mercado nos dicta cuándo van a ser los mejores momentos. En el caso que usted no tenga una decisión que la tenga que tomar ya, que la tenga que tomar urgente, conocer un poquito del mercado, conocer cuáles son los mejores meses, que voy a estar un poquito hablando más de esto en estos días, cuándo son los mejores meses para vender en diferentes mercados, ¿verdad? Porque no todos los mercados son iguales. Pero nada, cualquier cosita que estamos, les dejo un poquito comercial. Si no ha visto la aplicación de nosotros, tenemos una aplicación espectacular donde puede ver tendencias de mercado, puede ver el valor de su propiedad, me puede hacer preguntas, recibe reportes, puede ver las propiedades que se están vendiendo en su área. Si usted tiene una casa y no sabe el valor de la casa, también le da un reporte del valor de su propiedad basado en las casas que se están vendiendo al lado. O sea, la aplicación es espectacular, es completamente gratuita y bájela y déjenme saber qué es lo que opina. Muchas gracias y que tenga una excelente tarde.